Hey guys, Teiwaz here, back with another Battlefield history lesson. It's been a little while since I've done one of these videos, but with the release of Battlefield 5, I'm really excited to get back into them. With this being the first video, I figured what better subject to cover than an incredibly iconic American weapon, the M1A1 Carbine. Let's jump right into this. The M1A1 Carbine is a light and easy to use semi-automatic carbine. It was the standard US military firearm during World War II, the Korean War, and well into Vietnam, where it was eventually replaced by the M16. Though it looks very similar to the M1 Garand rifle, it is not a carbine version of it. The M1 Garand fires a 30-06 cartridge, where the M1A1 Carbine is a 30 caliber. There are also a few other differences that we'll discuss in a little bit. This specific model, the M1A1 Carbine, was the paratrooper model. It came with a 15-round magazine and side-folding stock. Around 150,000 of these were produced, but most were refurbished into different models such as the M1A2 and M1A3, which had better sights for adjusting to wind and elevation, full auto capabilities, and an underfolding stock. The original M1A1 with side-folding stock is incredibly rare to find these days. Back to the M1 Garand, between World War I and World War II, the U.S. Army Ordnance Office received reports that the full-sized M1 Garand rifles were too heavy and cumbersome to carry for most support troops such as mortarmen and radio personnel. After pre-war field exercises showed the M1 Garand to impede soldiers' mobility, a request was put in for a compact, light defensive weapon with greater range, accuracy, and firepower than pistols, while weighing half as much as the M1 Garand. By 1941, many of the major U.S. firearm companies and designers were in competition for the contract. Winchester did not submit a carbine design because it was busy working on its 30-06 Winchester M2 military rifle. However, after the death of Ed Browning, the lead designer of the M2, in May of 1939, Winchester hired David Williams, who had worked on a design for a short-stroke gas piston. By the time the U.S. military was in need of the lightweight weapon in 1941, Williams had reworked Browning's original M2 design to include his own short-stroke piston design and the Garand-style rotating bolt and operating rod, shaving the M2 prototype from 9.5 pounds to 7.5 pounds. After many of the carbines were rejected by Ordnance, including the slimmed-down M2, the final draft of the M1A1 submitted just 13 days later. The only major change made to the weapon was the caliber, being scaled back from a 30-06 to a 30 caliber SL cartridge. After initial Army testing in 1941, Winchester designed a more refined version of the M1A1, which was eventually standardized in October of 1941. An interesting fact about the M1A1's ammunition is the 30 caliber rounds were the first non-corrosive primers in a military firearm, which was a novelty at the time due to the expense of the propellant. The M1A1 has a closed gas system, which is not normally disassembled. If not for the non-corrosive powders, the gas system would fail pretty quickly. Taking advantage of the chemistry advances of the time, the 30 caliber round is about 27% more powerful than the 32 caliber round it was designed from. Taking all this into consideration, the M1 Garand is still approximately 3 times more powerful than the M1 Carbine. However, the M1 Carbine is roughly twice as powerful as the 45 ACP round, which were mostly used in the submachine guns at the time. The Thompson, M3, and M50 were all 45 ACP submachine guns. Not only are the 30 caliber rounds stronger, they are also lighter, meaning soldiers can carry more ammunition into battle than before. Starting service, the M1 Carbine had a 15-round straight box magazine. However, after the introduction of the Select Fire M2 Carbine in October of 1944, the 30-round curved magazine was introduced. Sometimes called banana clips for their shape, the 30-round curved magazine was standardized after World War II. However, the 15-round straight box magazines were issued and in service until the end of the Vietnam War. One of the most common accessories used with the M1 Carbine is the magazine pouch, which held an additional 2 15-round magazines. In total, over 6 million M1 carbines were manufactured during World War II. The M1 Carbine was the most produced small arm for America, beating out the M1 Garand, which had about 5.4 million rifles manufactured, and 1.3 million for the Thompson. Though the Winchester team designed the M1 Carbine, many different manufacturers worked to create the over 6 million carbines that went into service. The Inland Division of General Motors produced about 2.6 million M1 carbines, The Winchester Repeating Arms Company produced about 828,000. The Steering Gear Division of General Motors produced about 517,000. The Underwood Typewriter Company produced about 545,000. Yes, I said typewriter company. National Postal Meter produced about 413,000. The Quality Hardware Manufacturing Corp produced about 539,000. The International Business Machines, or IBM, produced about 346,000. Cooper Standard Products produced about 247,000. The Rock-Ola Manufacturing Corporation, best known for their jukeboxes, produced about 228,000. And the rarest of all the manufacturers, reported to have only created 239 M1 carbines, was the Commercial Controls Corporation. Could you imagine being on the front with an issued M1 carbine and you look down on the receiver to see it marked Rock-Ola, especially if you knew of their jukeboxes? So, despite there being many different manufacturers that created the over 6 million carbines, every single one of them had to be interchangeable. Parts from the Winchester Repeating Arms carbines should be usable with the parts from the Rock-Ola carbines. One of the reasons why the M1 carbine was the most manufactured weapon is really simple: cost. It was incredibly cost effective to produce the M1 carbine in comparison to the other weapons of the time. The M1 carbine at the start of World War II cost approximately $45 to create. In comparison to its 30-06 counterpart, the M1 Garand, which cost roughly $85 to create, you can see why so many M1 carbines were manufactured. Now, the submachine gun of the time, the Thompson, cost roughly 5 times, or $225 to manufacture, and that's why there were only around 1.3 million of them. That's still a lot of guns, though. Another reason why there were so many more M1 carbines than other weapons at the time was because of the ammunition it used. The 30 caliber ammunition was cheaper to create and used less resources, was easier to manufacture, was easier to store and ship, and soldiers could take much more of it into battle. So if we do the math, the 6 million M1 carbines cost around $270 million. The M1 Garands cost around $459 million. And the Thompsons cost around $292.5 million. That's a total of $1,021,500,000 just on guns. That's not including anything else for the war effort. No ammunition, no food, no fuel, nothing. At the start of its service, the M1A1 Carbine was not intended to serve as a primary weapon for the combat infantry. It was to be used by support troops. However, the M1 Carbine was much more accurate and had more penetrating power than the 45 caliber submachine guns of the time. Because of this, it was soon widely issued to infantry officers, paratroopers, NCOs, ammunition bearers, forward artillery observers, and other frontline troops that chose to take the carbine into battle. At first, the M1 Carbine gained high praise for its small size, lightweight, and firepower. Smaller statured soldiers, such as Audie Murphy, really liked the smaller stocks because they fit them well. Audie Murphy was one of America's most badass soldiers, receiving every Medal of Valor available from the U.S. Army for his World War II service, along with French and Belgian awards for heroism. However, after the initial reports of soldiers liking it, mixed reports started to come in of jammings, not suppressing the enemy enough, not having enough stopping power, requiring many bullets to stop an enemy soldier, and even a few reports of moisture buildup from the non-corrosive primers causing misfires in Europe. Most of these reports were not found till post-war evaluations, so there was not much that could have been done during the war. Initially, the M1A1 Carbine was to be produced in the select fire capability. However, with the US needing armaments quickly, they left that feature out of the light rifle program. The M1A1 was produced as a semi-automatic rifle, but later converted into different models, which were made to be select fire, along with a few other features I mentioned earlier. The Select Fire M2 was introduced on October 26th of 1944. Germany was using the STG-44, which fired a 7.92 by 33mm Kurz round in full auto. The M2 Select Fire was USA's response to the STG-44. Along with the M2 being select fire, it also came with a 30-round curved magazine. So there are a few discrepancies with the actual dates of production. The actual M2s were believed to have been manufactured starting in April of 1945, and conversion kits were issued on October 26th of 1944. This carbine started its life in 1945 and was used in military application till the fall of Saigon in 1975. For 30 years, 3 major wars, and countless global conflicts, it was trusted to keep our men in arms alive. Now they live out the remaining days of their lives as sports, hunting, and personal protection rifles. After the wars, it was used by police and prison guards alike, and even carried by riot police during the racial and civil unrest of the 60s and 70s. This really is one of America's most historically relevant weapons, being used by everyone from Malcolm X to Patty Hearst during her 1970s bank robberies. That's the M1A1 Carbine. What did you think of it? Have you guys had a chance to use it in Battlefield 5? Drop your comments down below and let me know. I'm curious to see what you guys think. With that being said, I'm going to get back to work here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later!